So you know when someone says something and your chest just sort of tightens up? A small hurt, a slight. And you think, really? That again? I shared on second day Rosh Hashanah that I've become very sensitive to the many disappointments that we hold in our lives. So if you haven't watched it or read it or you weren't with me, that was part one. This is part two. And as a reminder, I'm not talking about big tragedies like war, the horrors of major illness, tragic death, or abuse. Rather, smaller, incessant exhales that we carry in our hearts and that build up over time. And I wonder, on Yom Kippur, the day that we're pressing refresh, how can we live with our disappointments when they feel like dull thorns under our skin? Thorns of disappointment in our friends, our partners, our synagogue, our children, siblings, parents, those we work with, our colleagues, our government and elected officials, all that we missed during COVID, even with ourselves, even with God. Imagine you have a thorn in your arm that directly touches a nerve. When the thorn is touched, it's really painful. It's difficult to sleep because you roll over on it. It's hard to get close to people because they might touch it. You can't even go for a walk in the woods because you might brush up against branches and hurt the thorn. It constantly bothers you. Okay, so you have two choices, right? The first is to make sure that nothing touches it. And the second is to take out the thorn. Let's start with choice number one. If you decide to keep the thorn in, whether you know it or not, protecting the thorn becomes the work of a lifetime. A walk in the woods, rolling over when you sleep, you'll have to find a solution. So you design an apparatus that acts as a protective device. It works amazing, you're so proud. Yeah, you keep thinning out the woods when you take a walk, and it's a bit uncomfortable when you wear the apparatus to bed at night, but okay, you'll deal with it. But then over time, you have a new problem. The new problem is you've actually fallen in love. Why is that a problem? Because your super duper device makes it hard to even hug. So you design another kind of mechanism that allows closeness amongst people without actually touching. And years go by, and you make an even bigger and even better machine that doesn't have to be unstrapped at night or changed over when you hug, but it's heavy. So you put wheels on it. You could take it wherever you want. You have to change the doors in your house because it's so big that the protective apparatus can't get through them, but okay, now you can live your life. And you announce with pride, I've solved my problem. I'm free. I can go anywhere I want. I can do anything I want. The thorn used to run my life, but now it doesn't. The truth is, it completely runs your life. It seems obvious. Just take out the thorn. but we don't. We walk around with thorns of disappointment all the time. Why? Because we have desires and expectations, and we keep hoping that the people around us will change in some way. But for one reason or another, they don't, they can't, and we feel let down. And if we're honest, not one person can be the be-all and end-all for anyone. Not one friend, not one spouse, not one relationship. And surely we can't do that for other people either. So it's not surprising then that we don't always meet one another's expectations and they don't meet ours, which is why we keep walking around with thorns in our arms, bumping into one another and causing pain. Hold for a moment a disappointment you're sitting with right now in your life. A friend who cancels on you all the time. A coworker who doesn't pull his weight. A child who has your grandchildren way across the country. All the missed simchas and conferences and funerals you couldn't attend because of COVID. A partner that can't love us in the way we want to be loved. Even in ourselves. An aspect of our being which isn't where we'd like it to be, even with God. And I wonder if disappointments happen because we have certain expectations of one another and things go awry, are we being realistic? Maybe wearing our elaborate contraptions and removing doors in our homes, isn't that crazy? Or maybe trying to subtly manipulate people into acting how we want them to act isn't so bad. Don't we do that all the time? So there's a striking story in the Talmud about a woman who did just that. It takes place in 3 scenes: at home, in the garden, and in the oven. Scene 1, home. Rabbi Chiya bar Ashi used to fall on his face in prayer and say, "May the merciful one save me from my evil inclination." Just a little hint about Rabbi Asi, he had a little trouble controlling his libido. And so he prayed to keep it in check. So one day his wife overheard him praying at home, and she said to herself, "That's odd because he hasn't slept with me in a few years. Wonder why he's praying that." Scene 2, the garden. One day, Rabbi Chiya bar Ashi was studying in the garden, and she noticed, his wife noticed him, and she adorned herself and repeatedly walked past him. And he said, "Who are you?" Which, side note, that's amazing. Why doesn't he recognize his own wife? Is it because she dressed herself up so provocatively and so differently? Or was he so consumed with his study that he wasn't paying attention? So he said, "Who are you?" And she said, "I am Charuta." She goes by one name. Charuta, by the way, was a famous prostitute at the time. And it's sort of amazing because there are only, 12, 15 women who are named in the Talmud, and it's amazing that she gets a name. So her name, Charuta, literally means freedom or liberty, because she has the freedom to do whatever she wants with her life. And what's also fascinating is that she goes by one name, sort of like Madonna or Lizzo, right? So without a beat, he propositions her. And she said to him, hold on, give me that pomegranate from the top of the tree. And amazing, lo and behold, whoop, he jumps up, gets it, gives it to her. ... The Talmud doesn't tell you then what happens. You fill in the blanks. Scene 3, the oven. He comes home, and his wife is lighting the oven. Fascinating metaphor. All the psychologists in the room can, ponder that for a moment. Was she still on fire herself? Was she excited about the parts that she had previously repressed and proud of herself for changing the trajectory of her relationship and finally taking matters into her own hand? So she's lighting the oven, and he goes and sits in the oven. And she says to him, "What are you doing?" And then he breaks down and tells her everything that he did. And she says, "Honey, it's okay. It was me." He says, She says, "It really was me." And then she shows him signs to prove that it was her. And he says, "It doesn't matter, because my intention was to transgress." And the Gemara ends with just an open statement. The Gemara says, "And all the days of this righteous man's life, he would fast for the transgression he thought he committed until he died." The end. Moral of the story: we think we might be able to creatively manipulate people into doing what we wish and desire and hope that we want them to do, to meet our expectations and our needs, but eventually it backfires. People resent getting pushed around and manipulated. Doesn't work. So what other contraptions do we build to ease the irritations of the thorns of disappointment in our arms? We distract ourselves. We're really good at that. We pour ourselves into our work. We exercise constantly. We obsess over food intake or meal planning. We build a life revolved around our children or taking care of others. We read a lot. We binge watch. We waste hours and hours on our screens. You fill in the blank. We just read Al Chet. Pick the one that works for you. Essentially, we close ourselves off in order to protect ourselves. But in the end, closing only serves to lock us inside ourselves. Yes, there's always been choice number 2. Take out the thorn. But how? Remember that forest that we kept brushing up against? Come inside with me. But first, imagine one person in your life who keeps disappointing you. You know the person's strengths. That's why they're still in your life. But you're struggling with a weakness of theirs that pokes you like a thorn. Surface the expectation you have of them that keeps rubbing against you. And now imagine laying it down, giving it up, putting down your gear. I know it means that you're likely going to get hurt. You're unprotected. But just stay with me. And now, let's walk into the forest. The first step in gently removing our disappointing thorns is acceptance. I know it sounds simple, but it's actually really difficult. It takes deep humility to acknowledge that we're just a speck in the large scheme of things, a shimmering thread in a great, great web. Lately, I've actually been feeling connected to that great web a lot. I've sensed being surrounded by my ancestors, those who I knew who have passed, and those who I have no idea who they are, but I just sense their presence in my life. I sense them holding me, helping me, helping me make my way through the forest. And when I feel like I'm getting let down, when I'm not getting from another person what I really, really want from them, I'm drawn to the words of Raina Maria Rilke, who taught that courage is to meet what is strangest and most awesome and most inexplicable in others and in myself. Not to shape them into who we wish them to be. Because as Rilke taught, love is not about merging. So now walk in the forest a little more with me. We are now officially lost. We're not sure what direction to go, but we have one another. Jewish tradition teaches that each soul comes into the world to both learn and to teach. So maybe you have something to teach me, and I need to learn it, or I have something to teach you, and you need to learn that. And on top of it, our learning is not linear. The Hebrew word for learn is lilmod. It starts with a lamed. You know what a lamed looks like, right? Like this. It's all curvy. It's crooked, just like our learning. It twists and turns. And sometimes learning really, really hurts, especially when the thorn is close to the surface of our skin and it's trying to make its way out from under. So even though it's a winding path, would you go further in with me? And it's okay to ask questions. There's no rule against asking a good question. In fact, one of my favorite stories is about the Nobel laureate in physics, Isidore Rabbi. He was once asked in an interview, so why'd you become a scientist rather than a doctor, a lawyer, or a businessman, like all the other immigrant kids in your neighborhood? And he actually attributes it to his mom. He said, my mom made me the scientist that I am without ever intending it. Every other Jewish mother in Brooklyn would ask her kid after school, so, what'd you learn today? But not my mother. She said, Izzy, did you ask a good question today? Asking a good question. That's what made him a Nobel laureate. True story. So what if every time we felt that thorn of disappointment peeking through our skin, instead of wondering, what am I going to do about this? We ask with curiosity, what part of me is being disturbed by this? What button is being pushed? What am I yearning for that I'm trying to fill? Sit with your questions. It's a lot more interesting than the answers. So you've been patient with me. We're in the forest. We're lost. No one seems to be able to show us a straight way out. It's become clear we need to do this ourselves, but we're also surrounded by a web of ancestors helping us along, guiding us. Rabbi Kalamus Kalman Shapira, he was the rabbi in the Warsaw Ghetto. He created what he called a conscious community. Followers of his meditated, journaled, gathered regularly to process their feelings in the ghetto. Leave it to the Jews to have a processing group in the ghetto. Blows my mind. So he actually writes about disappointment. Imagine the disappointments he was grappling with. And he says that disappointments are, in order to transform disappointments, he teaches, we need to open our soul like a faucet. And he describes a disappointed soul like a flowing source of water that's blocked. And how do you do that? He teaches that we need to pay attention to, and these are his words, to bathe in the mikveh of our feelings, to quiet down, to observe every sensation that passes through our body. And then we will witness the heavenly roadmap that God has created for each of our individual souls. Bathing in our feelings. We're deep in the forest now. The memory of our super duper contraption that we were lugging around with us begins to fade. We soak in the mikveh of our feelings, and our thorn starts to release. It reminds me of when I was a kid. I grew up in a pre-war apartment in New York with wood floors, and I got splinters all the time. And my dad used to soak my foot in hot water, and then the splinter would slowly come out. Our breathing slows down. We're calm enough to tenderly, gently remove our thorn. Acceptance, learning, questioning, attention. The real question this Yom Kippur, the real question is, how do we want to live? With contraptions around our bodies, protecting us from our thorns of disappointment and closing ourselves off to those who do love us, even in their limited way and even in our limited ways? Or do we want to live a life where we feel our thorns of disappointments, because frankly, they're not going away, and we gently pull them out, one by one, by one, by one? The choice is in our hands. Gemar Chatima Tova.